AITA for making my younger sisters fly home early after they followed my husband? I have two younger sisters who are 15 and 17. They came to visit my husband and I on what was supposed to be a 5-week trip. Unfortunately, it had to end early after they were caught following my husband while he was having dinner with a client. I told them they had to leave immediately because I could tell my husband was close to exploding, and even though they kept begging me to hear them out and to let them stay, I wouldn't. I called our dad to let him know they would be coming home early and why, which didn't go over well. My stepmother wanted me to let them stay until the morning so they would fly back in the daytime, but I told her it wasn't possible and they had to leave immediately. I'm supposed to be visiting soon, but my sisters have told our dad that they don't want to see me, and my stepmother said I wasn't welcome in her house after what I did to them. The reason my husband was so angry is because the client was the one who noticed them taking pictures of them, and when he confronted them they were rude to her and to him. AITA?
Okay, I'm gonna call it. YTA, you're strangely reluctant to tell the whole story about why this was so egregious that it warranted immediate eviction. It's bad that they were taking pictures of your husband and his client. It's also just dumb teenager shit. It's also unclear why your husband confronted them with the client, instead of speaking to them without the client and telling them to go home. Regardless, I see nothing in this that justifies why you flat refused to let them say anything in their defense, or why they had to be sent home that very minute. Send them to bed and fly them home in the morning, like a responsible adult. I mean, how does that even work? You jumped online at some time after 8 in the evening and booked them flights and took them to the airport? Like it was some kind of emergency? Leaving their parents to pick them up at what late hour? Just can't see how this was necessary. ETA. Please, stop telling me why you think the teenager's behavior was bad. I already said it was bad. What I also said, and the reason for my judgment, because it's about the actual question op asked, which was not whether the teenager's behavior was bad, is that it was unnecessary to kick them out that very night. I'm going to say YTA with one exception. I agree with your reasons for flying them home, but rushing two teenage girls out and onto a plane at night is definitely unkind. You could have sent them to their room and flown them home in the morning when everyone had time to calm down. Moreover, underage teenage girls traveling unaccompanied at night is the recipe for one of those true crime shows. In this world, it's not safe. My only exception to YTA is if you were trying to protect them from your husband. You said he was going to explode. What did that mean? If you were frightened he would lash out at the girls, then you are fundamentally in an unsafe relationship, and I don't think you're the off for sending them home. But I do think you need to mend relationships with your family and possibly consider staying with them for a while. The kids obviously thought he was cheating and thought they were doing her a rom-com favor, yeah? I think any sort of client, after this has already happened, why weren't they given a heads up where he was? Would much rather have them apologize in person and delete photos taken rather than whatever this was. Honestly, seems like an overreaction without calm conversation to go with the punishment. So I think you're smart to question the explode comment. Sounds like the adults couldn't control their feelings. NTA, based on your responses, I can understand why it would upset your husband that he was being followed. They not only followed him, but were caught by clients snapping pics of them, and then when he confronted them, they got rude with him and his client. That could not only cost him his client, but his job. They were very much out of line for this, and needed to face the consequences of their actions. Where you are the awe is refusing to allow them to stay until morning, and putting them on a plane then. When their mother asked you to do that for safety reasons, you should have listened and done that. How would you feel if they were kidnapped, or hurt in some way? I know it can happen on a daytime flight too, but there is more of a chance on a nighttime flight, especially for young girls like them. Now, when they were taking pics, did you see any of the pics? Did you make sure there was nothing in those pics you needed to see? Maybe they had some kind of evidence that more was going on than just a business meeting. Or maybe they didn't. Who knows? Definitely not you, because you didn't look. Nah. I think they would have sent her the photos regardless of how upset they were if there was something there. Especially if they could have an "I told you so" moment over it.
AITA for not making my son remove a social media post disparaging my wife? Update. Hi all. This has certainly been a journey. I definitely knew there was a stigma against a more gentle approach to parenting, but I never knew it was this large. When my son woke up this morning, I took him out for breakfast where we had a talk about everything. Just as I mentioned in a comment, I wanted to have a talk with him in a way that led him to see what he had done wrong and hopefully independently inspire him to fix the post. Pretty quickly into our discussion, he pulled out his phone and showed me that he already had. He said he had started feeling guilty and edited it the night before. If this hadn't been the case or if he had refused to make changes, I would have put him on a 2-week social media ban. Because despite what some in the comments have said, I do set boundaries my child. Discipline typically falls on the parent who is around their child the most, in my experience. We discussed how it can feel good to get things like this off our chests on social media, that it's a thrill to be a little petty and have people see it, but that the excitement is short-lived. Obviously he agreed as he was already feeling guilty. I suggested journaling, writing a letter and giving it to me, mom, or another trusted adult he can vent his grievances to, etc. I reassured him that his feelings were valid and I wanted him to express them, just not in a public arena where, if he gets too used to running to social media, he could say something really inflammatory and awful in a moment of anger and then really regret it. This was obviously an open discourse between the two of us. Social media is a precarious place for young men to be right now in certain circumstances. I feel lucky that I've fostered a bond with my son where he can openly talk to me about what he's viewing, his thoughts on SM, etc. It was a good conversation that we've had in the past, and one we will revisit frequently in the future. Thankfully, he has male role models in his life that provide him with positive views of masculinity, so he doesn't need to run to the bigots of the world. Finally, the conversation turned to his relationship with his mom. This part feels incredibly personal, and despite this being an anonymous platform, I'd prefer to keep the nuances of my son's inner emotions regarding feeling ignored to myself. But I can tell you we've decided to have a family meeting before dinner tonight to discuss solutions, like family therapy. I'm committed to helping foster a connection between them in whatever way I can. I think this can best be done with the help of a therapist or a mediator. My own relationship with my wife and what that will look like in the future needs some fixing as well. Most of all, I want us to be strong co-parents. And quick side note, because I saw it coming up frequently, my son was not exposed to any sex and drugs culture in the bars. He was not given alcohol. He hung out with the other roadies, drank mocktails, but a majority of the time he was by the soundboard. He's very interested in that as a future career path, and this just ignited an even deeper love for live music. I appreciate the concern, but I'm not letting my 14-year-old do more than maybe have a sip of my wine at dinner because he wanted to taste it. Thank you for everyone who engaged me in a polite manner. I definitely agree I was the asshole in some aspects here. I should have acted sooner and rectified the situation last night. I need to work on communication with my wife. I need to do more in supporting her connection with our child. The advice was appreciated. I'm open to answering any more questions in the comments. My wife and I are both in our mid-30s and have a 14-year-old son. I've been a stay-at-home dad all his life while my wife has been more hands-off due to a somewhat demanding job. Still, some basic facts that anyone with even a surface-level knowledge of our kid knows is that he's a good boy. He gets great grades and is well-behaved. He's maybe a little spoiled, but aren't they all? My point is, I have rarely had to step in and deliver any real punishments thanks to open and consistent dialogue between the two of us. I have a longtime friend who plays in a decently popular local band. He's a father figure to my son, and they also have a very close bond thanks to similar interests. My son has always been the artsy type, and he's so excited when friend comes over because it means he can show him the latest guitar he's added to his collection or a new riff he's learned. During friend's recent visit, he mentioned going on tour soon and my son was intrigued. After pressing for details, he came to me later and asked if he could go with them on his fall break. He had plenty of promises at the ready, that he would listen to whatever friend said, that he would be on his best behavior, that he would never ask for anything ever again. After talking it out with him, I gave him a maybe. I reached out to friend for his thoughts, and he was all for it. I figured he wouldn't mind since he has a son around my kid's age who goes on tour with him occasionally, another thing my son had mentioned while pleading his case to me. I asked my wife, and after a very brief conversation, she agreed. Fast forward to the beginning of last week when he got packed up and set to leave. My wife asked where he was going. I reminded her, and she said she thought I was joking. I had no idea what part of it sounded like a joke, but she claimed my son wasn't allowed to go. I eventually persuaded her after our child went to his room in near tears. When he arrived home yesterday, I had never seen him so happy. He got to help the roadies set up for the shows, he got let into bars, he intentionally didn't wash off one of the X's on the back of his hands just so he could come home with it and show me, and friend was singing his praises over how helpful he was. A few hours later, my son made a social media post compiling photos from his time on tour. The caption was a long one but included such gems as, "This almost didn't happen, thanks mom." And, "Friend spent a lot of his free time with me, unlike my mom." This led to a pretty big argument where my wife, upon being alerted to the post's existence, demanded he take it down. He refused, so she turned to me and asked me to talk to him. I refused. I told her that while I didn't think what he was doing was right, it was clearly coming from somewhere. And that somewhere was a place in which he was feeling unheard and ignored by her. She's been ignoring me since. Edit. To answer a question, comment I see commonly coming up. I am not encouraging my son to air our dirty laundry on social media. I just don't think the first move should be to tell him to delete it when there is clearly legitimate hurt motivating what he's saying. We're the parents, we can't move on impulse based on our feelings. It might be the gut reaction to ask him to delete them, but instead I want us to take a pause and come to him with empathy and understanding where we discuss the matter together and help him decide what's best. As a lot of you are saying, this definitely is a teachable moment, and not one that can be easily impressed onto him by just saying, delete the posts, and not reinforcing the why, along with more positive ways to express himself. Edit 2. Please save your "get a job" comments. I plan to once my son gets his license. However, even if I didn't plan on rejoining the workforce, there is nothing wrong with former SAHPs who choose to be homemakers. My wife and I mutually agreed on this dynamic and she very much prefers working. This is not a productive addition to the conversation.
Of course your wife is ignoring you. You're supporting your son publicly disrespecting your wife because of a simple misunderstanding between you two about the tour. Your son is 14. Yes, there will be plenty of times where he's upset with either of you and will want to vent. But you just told him that it's okay to passive-aggressively post those emotional and hurtful words publicly. You just supported him in hurting your wife instead of teaching your son to handle those emotions in a healthy and respectful way. I wouldn't be surprised if you always play cool friend to your son and force your wife to always be the bad cop. YTA.
Your kid is still that, a kid. YTA, you're teaching him that airing your dirty laundry in public is okay. Better than actually talking with your family about your problems. Unless your wife is actually crazy, this all sounds like it came from a verbal misunderstanding. When she agreed, did she say something like, haha, yeah of course my underage son can tour unsupervised with a band for a week? You said the conversation was very brief. Sounds like you're trying to bury the lead here. Why is your communication so good with your son? It's really not if you won't even tell him you disapprove of what he's doing, but so shitty with your wife? ETA. A lot of your replies keep showing how much time you spend with your friend parenting your son, how your wife is never around. Do you happen to have an art studio in your home for this friend? Yo, I also just read the part where your underage son was let into bars during this trip. And you were happy about that? LMAOURLY are a terrible parent. Also, for those curious, he answered the brief convo question in another comment. He said to his wife that the tour lined up with their son's fall break and he wanted to go. She responded literally, sounds doable, and that was the last time they spoke about it. Edit for OP's update. Man completely misses the mark in every way. How his wife can put up with this guy is beyond me. Your son edited the post. You told him it was okay. What he wrote was valid. Then blamed your wife again for being a distant parent. You never told him it was your fault. She wasn't aware the trip was planned. Without her involvement. Don't plan to apologize to your wife, and don't plan to have your son apologize either. I feel bad for your wife, and worse for your son if you teach him treating his mom like this is a good example of what a man should be. You weren't the asshole in some ways, you're just the asshole. Even now. Period. Exactly. He's a kid who doesn't know how to process his feelings. Is he in therapy? Maybe family therapy? The posting shit publicly stuff isn't helpful to anyone. But he sees it as an outlet, and he is lucky to have you as someone who sees that it is just a cry for help. From what I'm inferring from your post in the comments, it sounds like you and your son think that your wife is not involved enough with your son. I think that this is a very important issue to bring up to your wife and work on as a family. That does not justify that stuff being on social media. You can teach your son how to express his frustrations appropriately and support him in resolving the issue. Have him edit his post to take out the rude stuff. As parents, your loyalty should be to each other when facing your children. If you have differences of opinion, you should discuss them behind closed doors and then present a united front when it comes to issues like this. If your wife is looking to you for backup in an argument in front of your child and you disagree, then you should say something like, "Honey, let's go discuss this a little further," and not just side with your kid. It seems like both you and your wife need to do better in certain areas. Her, in getting closer to your son. You, in respecting her and communicating well with her. Esh.